JSA issue 18, Geoff Johns and David Goyer writing, with Steven Sadowski and Steve Yule on the art. This, of course, is continuing the Injustice Be Done. We ended with a cliffhanger last time of Midnight being, well, I was going to say blinded by seeing Johnny Sorrow's face, but technically he's blind, so we suspect that's how they're going to get out of it. But this issue doesn't really advance much because we're in that moment, and then Sand thinks back to his history with him, and it serves as an origin story for at least this version of Johnny Sorrow, where originally he was just a goofy guy with tech who was robbing banks or whatever. He wasn't anything special. He wasn't this weirdly supernatural entity that he is now with the mask. And it's actually Sand's fault that he became this. Sand inadvertently caused this turn of events. So I'd forgotten what all this backstory was. I had a fascinating time reading this. I don't know. I mean, are you positive on this issue?
I'm mixed on this issue. I think the issue itself isn't bad. I think the content of the backstory is interesting enough. I like the dynamics it kind of leaves going forward between him and Sand.
Mm-hmm.
I do think it hurts the flow of the story, though, just kind of having this big exposition dump of a backstory as a full issue in the middle of quite a dramatic point. I think that harms quite a lot.
I think it's the right choice in this case. I think if you tried to split this up and like tell it, like, let's say you did a thing where you maybe like decolored it a little bit so it was clearly a flashback, and you maybe put it in parts throughout the arc, right, starting a couple issues ago. I think there was so much going on in so many different pockets of characters in those last two issues that it would have been like so insanely overstuffed trying to like squeeze some of this in, like sprinkled throughout. So I think while I get the complaint that it's like we completely stop, I actually kind of prefer that in this sense. You know, if you imagine a TV show where, okay, we're going to do a flashback episode right after a cliffhanger, instead of moving forward, we're going to go back and tell you something that's relevant to what was going to happen going forward. I think it works in that sense.
I get where you're coming from. I think it's more just the placement of it. I think, like, obviously you'd have to tweak a few things, but just the concept of the origin issue for Johnny Sorrow, I feel I would have preferred it between arcs rather than in the middle of the arc.
I could see that working. They could have done that for sure. Ultimately, though, I was really into the backstory and seeing the Golden Age version of Johnny Sorrow. And
it does give him a good excuse to have two artists. It feels natural.
And, you know, Sand, the Golden Boy, as he was calling himself at the time.
Sandy,
the Golden Boy, sorry. But, you know, he is responsible. He fires an arrow at the device he's wearing to phase through things and speed around. And that sends him into the, you know, what do they call it later?
I can't remember the name of the other dimension.
Oh dear, it'll come up. The subtle realms. Thank you, I got there. So he sends them into the subtle realms, and how this kind of rebuilt them in the style that this realm exists, and that's how he became this current version. And he spent a long time there until it spit him back out. And he comes after Sandy the Golden Boy and gets him at this theater. I did like that the theater's playing Todd Browning's Freaks at the front. I thought that was a nice little touch given the transformation that he's went through. And you know, he's killed the Seven Shadows, which I'm not going to pretend that I knew who they were other than this panel of him explaining that they were connected to the Mystery Men. But yeah, like he tells his backstory. We get this sort of almost demonic, otherworldly, almost Lovecraftian kind of idea of him being absorbed by this dimension and like reforming into this current form. And because he was gone, when he does come back and he's got his mask on, he goes to see his wife that he loves dearly, and it's actually taking his mask off to see his wife, where he discovers what taking his mask off will do to someone. So it leads to the death of his wife. So not only does he blame Sand for his own predicament, but also the death of the person he loves. You know, maybe if this hadn't happened, maybe he could have lived with being different and just stayed with his wife, and he would never have become this ultra super villain that he is now. But
probably,
yeah. So obviously, before he takes his mask off, though, the JSA of the time show up and save the day. The Spectre there's especially to sort of keep him contained. And the King of Tears does show up, because that's kind of his whole point. That's his purpose, is to like let the King of Tears come from that dimension into the real world. because he wants to take over. But they are able to contain it. There's even an explanation here for why it's actually just a liquid now. We get kind of a moment here where it turns into that. Like Spectre absorbs it and then cries it out. It's literally tears into a container, which is obviously
makes sense, right?
Yeah, which is obviously where they were keeping it when Sorrow stole it a number of issues ago. So I loved all this stuff, and that's obviously when it kind of wraps up and comes back. Scarab, like there's just stuff growing out of him, like matter's just flowing out of him and building around the house and whatnot. And the King of Tears is upon us, and that's kind of the big cliffhanger of the issue. So in terms of the actual present day story moving forward, basically it's just the King of Tears showed up, and that was it.
Pretty much.
The rest of it, though, I enjoyed the backstory. I think what I like about this, and what I like about this run especially, and this is where it's kind of starting to get to the meat of it, is that it really it gives it a chance to treat all of these characters who are on the JSA and give them their own stories, so that it feels like a true ensemble. But you know, we all hear 50 times how Batman started. We all hear 50 times how Superman started. It was rebooted and redone. It's actually so refreshing to just get a backstory of a character that I'm really becoming to enjoy in this book, and be like, oh hey, I don't really know this. This is really exciting to get this backstory. And the fact that now Johnny Sorrow has a personal vendetta against Sand makes him as a villainous presence even just that little bit more interesting, on top of just how kind of cool and scary he was before.
Oh, definitely. And I think it's something that's been lost in comics a little bit recently, in that we don't have runs that go on long enough to start, to really, I think this is probably not the creator's fault necessarily, but they're probably afraid they only have 12 issues to do their story, because that's all they're told they've got, and then it's all right, and we'll review it then. So they don't want to spend time or potentially waste time losing an issue of their story doing something like this, because they're like, I need to do my story. And they don't know until it's much later that, oh, well, you've got more time than you thought, even on those longer runs now, whereas I think it was a little bit different 20 years ago.
Yeah, it's a shame, because I actually kind of prefer this as a overall framework than I do
me too.
What a lot of modern comics have to do in terms of like fragmenting it. But hey, no, really good issue though. I enjoyed the backstory stuff. What you rating it?
I'm gonna give it a 6.5 because I like it well enough, but I just think it's flawed in where it's placed enough that it hurts the story.
Yeah, I can get on board with that. I'm going to give this a nice straight 8 out of 10. I was really into learning all this backstory stuff and giving Sand and Sorrow that personal connection. And I think giving Sorrow a sense of tragedy to go along with everything else is kind of neat.